want to thank both Jenna and Julie for coming back for the Fostering Independence and Building Community in Students with Disabilities, our part 2. And those of you who maybe missed part 1, I would just ask you can go back. It's on our YouTube channel and on Facebook Live. But before we start, I'm going to kick off by just stating I'm Lisa Valerio, and I'm the founder of the Phoenicia Foundation. And I'm here this evening with Julia Payne and Jenna Smith. And I'm going to do a quick little introduction. So I'm going to start with Julia. Julia is a vocational specialist with the San Mateo Union High School District in the San Mateo Unified School District, right, in San Mateo, California. For 12 years, she's worked in a classroom and in communities serving people with disabilities and helping them achieve meaningful adult lives. She has experience as an adult transition teacher, a high school autism teacher, and an ABA therapist. She holds an educational special teaching credential from the state of California and an MA in special education specializing in moderate to severe disabilities. And then Jenna Smith is an educational specialist also with the San Mateo Union High School District, which is in San Mateo, California. And she has over 30 years of experience serving people with disabilities through her work in education and social services. She has experience as an adult transition teacher, a middle school autism teacher, behavioral consultant, and a program director. Jenna holds an educational specialist teaching credential from the state of California and also an MA in special education specializing in moderate to severe disabilities and autism. So with that, I'm going to let them kick us off, and I will be back for the Q&A section. So thanks again, Julia and Jenna.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to part 2 of our webinar on fostering independence and building community and students with disabilities. So this tonight for our part 2, we are focusing on creating community. And we're focusing on this because community support is vital in building independence in young adults with disabilities. We really need to prepare our students and community members to engage with each other and with others in a way that's meaningful and appropriate. So definitely one of the ways to do that, we can start by teaching social norms that promote positive outlook on people with disabilities. And that's going to be something that we're going to start out talking about. And then we're going to go into talking more about some specific strategies that you can use for creating community.
So as Julia said, we're going to cover quite a lot of topics tonight. And in our run through, we realized, boy, the meat and potatoes of what we really want to focus on here is going to be the last 2 sections. So we're going to move fairly quickly through these first sections, looking at ability awareness and the idea of skills versus deficits, and the concepts of advocacy and self-advocacy for our students. And then age appropriateness, and that topic's really important in helping our students to become successful members of our society. And then we're really going to spend the bulk of our time looking at how we create natural supports, just the process of doing that, and how those natural supports can then move into fostering employment and job development for the adults that we work with.
Thanks, Jenna. So as Jenna said, we're going to start out with talking about ability awareness. Because this is really our first step to creating community, is making sure that the community is aware of your students and who they are as people. So I think ability awareness is not always a concept or a phrase that people are familiar with. It's something that I think we use a lot in the world of special education, but I just want to define it for you if it's something you've never heard before. So we kind of defined it as teaching others to be mindful about disabilities of an individual in a way that promotes understanding, acceptance, and I think one of the things most importantly, appreciation. So how do you do this? How do you do ability awareness? One of the things we like to start with is just brainstorming, thinking about what is so great about the student or the family member or the person that you want people to know about. And this is the time that you get to brag all about the things that make this student so wonderful. And I know that if you are working with students with disabilities, or you have a family member with disabilities, you already know and recognize all those wonderful things. And we want to make sure that other people also recognize those things, because it's not always the thing that people see first. So this might be a way, if you're a teacher, you might need to review some previous assessments and identify those specific skills, because this is going to help you when you're ready to share it. And then you share that information. And you can do that in a lot of different ways. But it could be talking to people, it could be doing a presentation, it could be handing out a flyer, it could be helping a student talk about themselves. And we're going to talk about those in the later sections. So when you are doing any ability awareness, it's great to start to kind of reframe how you think about things, reframe how you think about skills and needs. We want to start with focusing on skills. We need to move away from talking about the deficits that our students have. And if we do need to talk about something that is maybe not a strength for a student, we can focus on what does a student need to be successful instead of what they can't do. All students can do. They can do things. It's just what degree of support do they need to do it. So really changing the way we think as educators, as parents, as family members, as support people. If we can change the way we think about it, it's going to help change the way other people think about it, how our students think about it. So another thing that you can do is when you're doing ability awareness is using something called person first language. And this is something that I know when I first learned about this, it took me a long time to retrain myself. I was so used to talking about people using their disability as a way to describe them. And I really had to get used to changing the way I did that. And it was with practice. I mean, I remember when I was in school, my professors would if you ever didn't use person first language, they would right away call you on it, because it's just something that it's hard to retrain yourself to do it. But it's really important that we do it. And I'll talk more about why. Some aspects of person first language are, you want to highlight the person, not the disability. You want to use their actual age, not their developmental age. So how old are they, and not how old are they acting. So examples would be, if you're describing somebody with Down syndrome, you would say a young man with Down syndrome, instead of saying a Down syndrome kid. You are talking about the person first with their appropriate age, instead of leading with their disability. Another example would be a woman on the autism spectrum instead of an autistic girl. And the reason we want to do this is because words matter. Our words do matter, because they shape the way that we perceive and others perceive our students, and the way that the student perceives themselves. So the more you talk about somebody in the light of what are they able to do, who they are as a person, and not about their disability or deficits, the more you're going to see them like that, and the more other people will see them like that. So the typical presentation we might hear from somebody is, and if you were here last week, we gave an example of our student Brian, who had trouble showering by himself. So the typical presentation would be, Brian can't shower, right? He can't do it by himself. So we just say he can't shower by himself. But really, when we were able to provide him with some modifications, it is, Brian can shower. He just needs assistance with getting the hot water right. So using an ability perspective, talking about what people can do and how they can do it and what they need support with is really important when you're trying to show other people the value of your students or your family members.
And so this leads naturally into the idea of advocacy and self-advocacy, because the things that Julia was talking about really are ways to advocate for your student. And so just to, to start with a quick look at what those definitions mean, advocacy is the public support for a student or their views and interests. Self-advocacy is the student representing themselves or their views and their interests. And it's an important differentiation. And really, as advocates, parents, teachers, family members, counselors, we are all advocates for our students. And I think we're all very comfortable in that role. But this is, again, making that shift in your mind that you can also teach that adult to become a self-advocate and empower them. And that is a way, again, of honoring them as an adult and helping the world to see them as an adult. Yes, advocate, for sure, advocate, but teaching them to do it for themselves is furthering this process of their ability to access their world and make a difference for themselves. So, and it says it here, basically continue to be an advocate, stand up for their rights and their choices. But when you're out in the world, and you're going to see that a big part of how this process works is really just beginning to have that adult with a disability everywhere you go. While you're out in the world, teach them how to advocate for themselves. And again, I go back to very simple things, such as if someone is, you're at a restaurant and a person is asking, what would she like to eat? When you say, well, why don't you ask her? And she begins to say what she would like to eat. Over time, she's going to begin to expect that people are asking of her, what do you want to eat? What is your choice? She's going to begin to expect the community to address her instead of her mom and dad, or instead of her grandma, or instead of her teacher. And that is teaching her to be a self-advocate, so that eventually when a waiter asks, what would she like to eat? Maybe she's going to turn to that waiter and say, well, I would like. And that's the beginning of self-advocacy. So, and there's no one place to do it. The world is our classroom. And that's the exciting thing about beginning to involve the community in our students' lives and our students in the community, is the world becomes our classroom, and there's so much learning to be done out there. As with Julia's earlier statements, really, it's still about focusing on the positives and sharing those with others, using positive language in public when you're referring to the student, using language that's, again, respectful to them, a young woman with autism instead of an autistic girl. Taking the time to set your student up for success when you're out in the community. Every time that your student is out there and successful, that is them beginning to set that standard for how the community will see them in the future. So taking the time to make sure that you're not pushing people too quickly to try things that are difficult, and also not selling them short, is going to set them up to have positive experiences, and the community will have a positive experience of that student. And that is, again, the beginning of advocacy. When a student is successful, it motivates them, and it motivates the community to continue to do that engaging. And so you'll see when we go into, again, as I call it, the meat and potatoes of this, where we're spelling out how to successfully do this, one of the things that's most important is really not rushing the process, staying in the moment, and recognizing that the journey is the destination sometimes. And so again, age appropriate, we're going to go into some specifics about that, but reinforcing that age appropriate participation of any kind. It's more important to highlight that your student is an adult and capable than to focus on the skill. And so we want to also normalize different behaviors so others can understand what's happening. An example of this might be if you have a student maybe who's on the spectrum, and when they're really excited, they've got some flapping behavior or rocking behavior because they're really excited. If you just are out in public and you say to people, oh, he obviously loves this movie, he's reacting, this is him being really happy, or this is Johnny telling you that he is so happy to meet you. So you begin to tell people what those behaviors mean, and you normalize it. And then they go, oh, that's just him happy. And they begin to understand. And again, reinforce the journey, not just the destination. Our goal is to create happy, contributing members of society, and not to push for some specific skill. And so you'll find that there's not a certain point where they went from being just this student to now they're a member of society. It is the journey itself that creates that, and the relationships that they develop. And it's sort of you'll look up one day and realize, wow, look at what we've done. And so again, just focus on the journey, not the destination. And finally, it's really important with our students for them to understand their disability and to understand the rights that go along with their understanding of their disability. And we don't want to pretend that students don't have areas of need. We want them to understand their areas of need themselves so that they can advocate for what they need. Like we talked about with Brian, once he began to shower and use that shower that we set up for him, where we modified it, when he went to a different environment, we were taking students to the gym at the local community college to work out. He was able to say to the job coach who was working with him, oh, I need help with the temperature on the shower. So again, it gave him confidence to know he could do this. I can take a shower, and here's the part I need help with. That was self-advocacy that he didn't have prior to understanding his specific needs. And communication skills with our students are another area that are really important to highlight and help create understanding with the community, whether that's the use of picture exchange schedules, whether that's just helping interpret for people when a student's speech is a little bit, maybe I have some students that have a little hard time with some enunciation. And so if I can communicate with the waiter or with the person they're interacting with and kind of interpret for them the first time, again, with repetition and continued interaction, they're going to begin to understand that student. But making sure they can communicate their needs and wants is super important in self-advocacy.
So one of the things Jenna mentioned within self-advocacy and advocacy is reinforcing some of those age-appropriate behaviors. So we want to touch a little bit deeper in this. And this is a huge part in having our community members see our students as adults, is helping our adults do things that are age appropriate. So one of the ways that you can do this is introduce your student to age appropriate activities so that they can foster interest in those things. Our students are sometimes not naturally going to seek out things that are age appropriate because a lot of our students, especially students who might have autism, they love structure, they love routine, they love things that are the same. So for them to go reach out and find something new might not be something that they naturally do. And so sometimes that means our students get stuck on things that they loved as children and they never move past that. It's not that they can't find things that are age appropriate that they like, but they might need you to introduce them. So if it's showing them movies that doesn't have to be an R-rated movie or a movie that's very adult, but just something that maybe other people their age might also enjoy watching. Is it magazines instead of kids' books? It's still pictures and still stuff. What can it be that they can be introduced to that is age appropriate? That way they can start finding things they do like. That being said, sometimes our students or our family members love things that are meant for children. And that is the thing that they love the most. And that's okay. It's not something we don't want to take things away that our kids or our students love to do, but maybe we can help them find a more adult expression of that interest. Or maybe we can reserve some of those interests for at home where the public is not going to judge them and already reinforce a stereotype of them being like children. And maybe we can find a different activity for them to do in public that they like. So an example of this might be a lot of our students love Disney. And hey, there's a lot of adults who love Disney too, and that's okay. But adults with disabilities sometimes have to fight against the stereotypes, as I said before. And so even though Disney might be an adult interest, with our students, how can we really make sure that that expression is more adult? Instead of having them bring a doll that's a Disney doll or a toy, maybe you find a cool little pin or a patch to put on a adult backpack instead of a kid's backpack. Any way you can do to make it more adult, but without taking the thing that they love away, will help other people view them as adults. And you might be surprised. They might love something that you never knew that they loved. I just want to share an example. So this picture is of one of our students who is engaging in something very age appropriate, doing makeup. And I think we kind of talked about this before because in our previous presentation about pathways, this is actually a student who loves makeup so much that she wants to actually do this as a career. So she's practicing this constantly, but it's really important that, you know, she has access to this. She is able to learn about makeup because it is age appropriate. And that being said, this is a perfect segue into this next topic, cultural collateral. Basically, when you have shared interests, there's value to having shared interests of other people the same age, because this gives you something to talk about. You can't, it's really hard to form relationships if you don't have any common interests. So giving our students the opportunity to engage in those activities that might provide them some cultural collateral, bringing in other people the same age who might want to do those activities is a great way to help form relationships for our students. The example on our screen right now, there's a picture of one of our students playing video games. There's also a staff member, by the way. But there's also a young lady who does not have a disability, and they're playing video games. And one of the reasons we have a video game system in our classroom for break time, for lunchtime, is because it would bring other kids in, and that started to build relationships naturally. This student would come in to play video games, and then she started really forming a relationship with some of the students, and then she started to be a natural support, which we are going to talk more about in depth about that means. But it's just a great way to help our students build relationships. So I think just a point is, like, you can't talk about a movie you haven't seen, and you can't talk about a game you haven't played. So if students don't have access to these age appropriate things, they're not going to be able to engage in some of those relationship building activities, to find people who don't have disabilities, their same age, to become friends with, to create a community with. So another age appropriate activity that we really want to enforce is dressing like an adult. So if your student dresses themselves, or if they don't, either way, can you encourage them to dress like other people their age? Can you make sure, if you're buying their clothes, buy things that other people their age think are cool? You know, we kind of had some examples because sometimes it's hard to get our students to wear things that are maybe not as comfortable. So, hey, if they love wearing sweatpants, can you get them some cool looking sweatpants, some joggers, something that the other kids like? That's okay. At least that's one step. But being said, you know, you only have one chance to make a first impression. And I know that's kind of something that people say a lot, but it's true, especially socially. So, you know, if your student is walking down the street and maybe is dressed like a child, or dressed like somebody that maybe doesn't take care of themselves that well, it's going to make an impression on other people, and people are unfortunately going to judge them for that. So can we set our students up to make a good first impression, so people don't automatically assume that they can't do, or they're less than? We want people to value them as other members of the society and of the community. This really goes to say for professional activities as well. You know, we're going to talk more about job development. So it's really important that we enforce work appropriate dress codes with our students if that's what we're teaching. If we are teaching job skills, we need to enforce work appropriate outfits. Actually, this picture right here is a couple of our students who we're going on a tour to a job site where they wanted to make a good impression because, hey, maybe this person might want to hire them. So they dressed up, they wore suits to this thing. They wanted to be ready for an interview if needed. So they were ready, and they did make a good impression, and people did like them. And we actually had that as a job site. We ended up being able to impress the people. It was a hotel. We were able to impress this hotel, and they ended up giving jobs to a lot of our students. So it was a great way to make a great first impression. A big part of age appropriateness is adult communication. It's not only how our students talk, but it's how we talk to them. So when you are talking to a student, think about your tone of voice. Would you talk to another adult like that? Are you talking like you would talk to a child? And if you are, it might be something you need to look at and kind of catch yourself. As we said, practice making sure that you're talking to those students as adults. I know, again, this was something that sometimes you really have to be conscious about it because it's not always our natural tendency. You are the model. So if you model age appropriate language for your students at all time, they are going to be more likely to use age appropriate language. Also, you might have to have really direct instruction on how to talk to other adults in the community. This is a skill that doesn't come naturally for a lot of our students. So sometimes you have to pre-teach it in the classroom, practice with other peers, practice with staff members. And when you are in the community, you might have to slowly teach those students how to have adult interactions with other people in the community. Code switching is something that I just kind of want to talk about because this is that giving that direct instruction for adult communication. So you need to be holding your students the same level of communication by teaching them about code switching. If they don't know how to talk to other adults in a way that's age appropriate, they might do things like call their mom mommy to everybody when they're referring to their mom. Mommy said, mommy said, mommy said. But that's not what other adults do. Other adults would say my mom or my mother when talking to other people about a family member. So sometimes you have to teach that very explicitly to our students and teach them how to use that language. An example of code switching, which is really just knowing when to talk or dress in certain situations, is as a student here, you can see is like in very appropriate outfit here for the situation. It was a school dance. And then here he is in his streetwear, which was appropriate when he was in the street, but he wouldn't wear that to jobs. That was what he wore because he thought it was cool, and it was cool. But he knew when to wear it. And so that was something that sometimes you had to teach directly and really make it a point that students know that and understand that. Having adult responsibilities, I think is probably one of the most important parts of this. So how does your student take care of themselves? Do they feed themselves? Do they dress themselves? Do they shower for themselves? Do they prepare their own food? Sometimes it's maybe they don't have those skills yet, but if they are able to do it, are you expecting it? And if they are not able to do it, are you working towards it? It should be an expectation for all adults that they can do these things, even if they have a disability. And if they can't do it completely by themselves, we need to go back to what we talked about before, which is what part can they do? What modifications do they need to do this to be independent? And it's important to teach them how to take care of others. Other adults in the community do things for other people. And just because our students have disabilities does not mean that they can't have responsibility. So are they polite? Do they hold the door for others? Do they have manners? Are they helping at home with responsibilities? Maybe they're helping to take care of older family members. That's a really appropriate adult responsibility. So just thinking about what other people are doing who are their age. Are they doing the same thing? And are you expecting it?
So all of the topics we've talked about up till now are really sort of helping to lay the foundation for this, which is, the point of this whole thing is to create natural supports and look at creating supports in the community that allow your student to be an active, participating, functioning member of your society. And so the age appropriateness and the advocacy and teaching them to self-advocate, all of these things are important because the general public doesn't all have the same experience that everyone who is attending this has with individuals with disabilities. And so there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of unknown. And so in order to break down those barriers, we need to do the things that we've talked about up till now. And then we work on actually creating these natural supports. So what that means, what is a natural support? A natural support is basically involving other people in the lives of your student, fostering relationships with the community so that they can begin to provide the support to our students and enable them to access the community without family supports or without paid supports. And it makes a huge difference in the lives of our students, the empowerment and the sense of responsibility they feel when they begin to access their community independently. So the first step to that is building relationships. And that's what a lot of this was laying the groundwork for. We want to have our students be as independent as possible. And to do that, we're going to need to enlist the help of our community. And in order to do that, we have to let our community meet and greet and understand and have a relationship with our students. This is a group of students out at a local farmers market, and we would go to this same farmers market time and again. And this particular booth, the owner there got to know our kids and really began to sort of pay some special attention in working with our students. And in fact, there is now an adult day program in our area that is going to have a relationship with their local farmers market and be selling produce that they grow. So again, if you begin to think of your community as all the possible job sites, all the possible future friendships that they could have, the world is your classroom. So we want to start by building relationships. And the way to do that is to bring your student with you everywhere you go. Again, you need the community. They've got to be in the community to build those relationships. And then you've got to actually make introductions. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that. And then you're going to teach other people how to interact. What is the appropriate way to work with your student? That could be anything from, as I said before, teaching someone to address your student and not you. To see them as an adult who can answer for themselves, who has an opinion for themselves, who has their own specific set of wants and needs. And it's also just teaching people how to interact, again, by interpreting the behaviors that we may know that they are still unfamiliar with. So we're going to talk again specifically about how to do this. One of the most important things is repetition, repetition, repetition. So I'm going to use my own personal experience here to give you some background. I was a foster parent for an adult with a disability. And I really wanted to begin to open up my community for this young man so that he could be independent and accessing where we lived. So I began to go to certain stores and places over and over and over with him so that they could get to know him. Relationships don't happen overnight, and you don't want to pressure or force things. But if you do go out in the community to the same places at the same times, you will begin to see you're interacting with some of the same people. So having a routine, including your student in the routine, and making those introductions will help those relationships to form. The other thing is making a conscious choice to frequent some of the same establishments rather than going to multiple environments. So again, using my example, there was a large chain store near where I lived where I could very easily have taken the young man who was living with me to go buy my groceries. However, large chain stores tend to have large bunches of people who work there and a large turnover, whereas right down the street, a little closer, easier to access physically, was a small corner store. It cost more money for me to buy my milk there. It cost more money for me to buy my coffee there, but it was a single person working behind the register. He happened to also be the owner of the store, and he was there all the time. So by going to that same store over and over and buying our milk and buying my coffee, we began to make those connections. And I was able to have this young adult begin to interact with the person. They knew each other on a first name basis. They would say hello. And when they were very comfortable with us, I could move on to some of those next steps, which were teaching him how to interact with my student, letting my student give the money for the purchase, letting that person know this is what he's capable of doing and here's what he needs help with. The other thing that's important is keeping it safe. So the whole time I'm doing this for my student, I am assessing and evaluating the environment that he's in to make sure that it is safe. Follow your instincts. You'll know if it doesn't feel safe, don't do it. So again, there may be larger streets near your area where it's not really safe to cross. And so you may want to find a store or a location where you're going to go that is a little safer for them to access independently. You're going to know neighborhoods that are safer than others. And again, you're going to start to get to know people and begin to know when to trust them to move on to that next step. Not all students are going to become fully independent in every skill. So you're going to work for the closest approximation of that skill, and that's still independence. So for my young man, he couldn't count change. He was never going to know exactly how much money he was supposed to get back from a purchase. But we went to the store often enough to have a sense of how much the main things we bought were. And when he was ready, I was able to have him practice paying. And I was also able to let the clerk, who was also the owner, know, this young man does not know how to count change. So he needs to have his change, and please help him remember to get the receipt so we can work on counting change when he comes back. So over time, we went from him going with me to me following him to make sure he could get there and watching from afar while he made the purchase, to me sending him down the street. Hey, we need some milk for cereal. Do you mind going and getting it? And he felt so proud the first time he was able to go by himself and get that gallon of milk. And it took time. It took months. And does he count his change? No. But does that mean that because he can't count change that he shouldn't be able to go buy milk for the family? No. It's success. He can do something that helps me out. He can do something that makes him feel like he is helping and contributing to our household. So that was a success, and that's what it can look like. The same can be true for the classroom setting. I know we have a lot of teachers who are on here. So within the classroom, your natural support may not be the guy who runs the store or a neighbor or a bus driver who can let your student know, hey, it's time to get off the bus. This is your stop. It's going to be students and staff or family members who happen to help out in the classroom. And so again, setting up the classroom environment for the student to be successful and achieve the most independence is important. Peer support is always our preferred support because, again, that's helping foster relationships that are age appropriate. Again, that video game that you saw was in my classroom, and we had students come in, and the benefit was not just to my students, but that young woman who was in there coming in to visit our kids, she eventually went on to school. She wants to be a special ed teacher. She never knew that was even an interest that she had until she began coming down to our room because we were the video game room. So again, making these connections doesn't just foster independence for my student, it fosters independence for all the students and creates confidence for all of the students as they develop these relationships.
So Jenna just spoke a lot about, creating those natural supports, and that can be with, activities that are for independent living, like going grocery shopping. But that's also really important when we get into wanting our students to be employed. And this can be a really difficult thing. And as we said in our first, last week in our first part of this webinar, that is not going to be the pathway for everybody. Some students are going to stop at just being contributing members to their own household, to their family, working on their own independence, and that's okay. But there are going to be some students who are ready for employment, and we want to give you some more specific techniques on how to do this. So as we kind of said, if you are seeking employment, if it seems like that's the most appropriate pathway for your student, you're going to have kind of a few ways to do that. You can either approach established businesses that have jobs or might have a need for a position, or you can be creating your own opportunities. So we'll go over both of those. And we touched on this a little bit last time, but we wanted to give things a little more specific, like how to and some steps to do this, which I actually think was a question from a participant last week. So one of the things, if you're going to be approaching a business, if you're looking at established jobs, it is always best to start with a business that is known to be friendly or familiar to people with disabilities. If there is a company out there or a business that you already know might be open to hiring people with disabilities, then that's a great place to start. Where we live, we definitely have a few of those companies that that's a known thing. They hire people with disabilities. I think this picture right here is actually of a job site we have that hires quite a few of our students once they leave our program. They hire, it's a grocery store, and they will hire our students to stock shelves, to bag groceries, to get carts. And so knowing that we already kind of have a relationship, that they're already open to it, it's a great place for us to start when we're trying to find an opportunity for a student. And having that relationship that Jenna just talked about, building those relationships, you know, that going to the same market all the time, the guy who owns it might start to be like, hey, okay, yeah, he could come in and do a little work for me. Like, I see him every day anyways. I know he's a hard worker. He's friendly. Like, it's going to give you an in if that person already has some kind of emotional investment in some of the students. Or maybe in you. Maybe they're going to do it because they know you. And that's a great way to do it. Sometimes you have to leverage that. I do it a lot when I find jobs for students. So when you're approaching businesses, you got to sell your student. That's the first thing. You go in there and you just need to talk up that student. All those things we talked about, ability awareness and advocacy. This is where you use those skills. Sometimes our students sell themselves. I mean, I don't know, look at that face. Who wouldn't want to hire that kid? He is just happy and wonderful and such a joy to be around. So sometimes you need to make it a little more explicit though. Sometimes people aren't going to know why you should hire our kids and our young adults. I'm sorry. See, I even caught myself on using that language. It's a habit. Highlight the known benefits. Our students usually have excellent attendance. They never miss a day, especially our students with autism who are very, very strong into routine and rules. A lot of the times they're really hardworking and maybe willing to do repetitive tasks that other people don't want to do. You can highlight that. That's something I go in with all the time is sometimes I say, what are you having a hard time getting other employees to do? Or what jobs are you having a hard time filling? And then I can be like, I have the perfect student for you. Not every student is going to be a perfect fit, but a lot of the times we can find a student that is a perfect fit for. You also might need to sell the benefits to the business. So we talked about, selling the student. Why is the student so great? Why is it a great employee? But now let's talk about why it's good for the business to hire our students. We like to highlight that you're creating new partnerships. I usually go in when I am approaching businesses, and the first thing I do is I call them a partner. I call them, you're our community partner. So they right there get buy-in. They get excited about thinking, well, we're creating a partnership with this school district, with this program, with this family. And as I said, like it just gives some buy-in when you bring that personal relationship in. You can also highlight the altruism of it, helping other people, the virtue of charity. And don't think it's below you to say those things. I say it all the time. But also, one thing we don't always think about is a lot of customers will start to recognize that you are employing people with disabilities. And sometimes we have customers who come in and they will report back to the owners of the business that we use or the managers and say, wow, I come shop here because I love seeing your employees with disabilities. They make my day. And I am supporting your business because you employ people with disabilities. So that is something that we can always highlight to businesses when we're trying to convince them to give us a shot. A lot of the times, once we get our foot in the door, we sell ourselves, right? Our students don't need selling after that if we do it correctly, which we'll talk about how to do that correctly too. So here's kind of some step-by-steps. This is how to create some employment opportunities. And like we could do a 5-part webinar on just this alone. So this is going to be an overview for you. But if you've never done this, at least this is some basic steps. So first step is identifying that target business. What business are you going to approach? Sometimes you're approaching like 10, 15 businesses at a time. You just get wherever you can. But sometimes there's a specific place where you're like, that's the place I want to go because I think I'm going to have the best chance of getting my student in there. Is it a place you have a relationship with? Do you know that they're already hiring? Or have you identified a need in that business? You walk in there and you're like, man, it looks like they're really struggling to clean. You can go in there and say, hey, I noticed maybe you might need somebody in there to help clean. Or, hey, I noticed, the carts are always out in the shopping center or in the parking lot. Maybe we could do that for you. And so if you already know what you might be pitching for your student to do, that's helpful as well. Speaking of that, when you approach the business, which is step 2, you need to have a plan. You need to know what you're going to say, know what you're going to be pitching. Don't just go in there to have a conversation. I mean, that can be your earlier steps of building that relationship. But when you are ready to pitch having a student go to work, you need to be prepared. Have your information ready. And be professional. I know some of you are family members, but come in with your job developing hat on. I go in there, I'm not going in on the weekend when I'm in my workout clothes. I'm going in there as a professional in my work clothes with my badge on. What can I do to show that this is a real relationship we're trying to build? I want to just show you guys really quickly. This is a brochure that actually Gemma's program uses. This is all about their students. It's just one tool that we use when we are going and developing jobs. I also sometimes even have like a letter that I've prepared to send that I give to a manager. If maybe they're not the ones who can make the decision, they can bring it back to the owner. But it's a little hard. It's a tri-fold brochure, so you're going to see it printed a little bit weird, but it has pictures of our students. It has contact information of the teachers. It has on the back, it talks about what do students learn in our program? What are we going to be supporting with? More pictures, who we are, what we do. Here's some job sites. Here are people that have already partnered with us. Don't you want to be on this brochure too? We'll add your name. That's something we always say. Or we tell them, we'll give you free press. We will do whatever we can to promote your business. We are going to go to every single person we see and say, hey, you should go shop here because they employ our students. And then also like, here's some other partnerships that we have. So it's just a nice tool to have. If you can make something like this, have it ready to hand out, it's a great way to be prepared. So after you have gone in, approached them, told them about what you want, make sure you're following up, because sometimes they're not ready to commit right away. So sometimes they need to take a minute to think about it, or they were really busy and they just didn't have time to, make that decision, or maybe the person who can make the decision is not there. So following up until you get a definitive answer. Sometimes you have to be that squeaky wheel. I mean, going in every few days and be like, hey, what do you think? Sometimes when I follow up, I bring a student the second time and be like, this is the student I really want to have here, especially if it's a student that will wow them. Bring them in, have them be the face of it. Whatever you can do to convince somebody to just give your kids a chance. So after you get that initial chance, there's some things you're gonna have to do. So you might want to make it enticing. If you're in the position to offer it as an internship or volunteer, like say basically like, hey, we'll come work on a trial basis. You don't have to pay us right away. We just want to prove that we are going to be good workers. That if you can do that, if you're in that position, that's a great way to get some buy-in. If you can do job coaching, this can be from a teacher, this can be from a family member. If you are willing to go stand next to that person and teach them on the job, so that the employer is not responsible for teaching the person with a disability how to do that job. If you are able to do that, it will make your student so much more successful. And then you can fade out. It's not going to be forever. A lot of the times you might just need it to get set up. Maybe you make some accommodations or modifications so that that student can do it independently, or once they know the job really well, they might be able to be independent. Like Jenna said, with repetition, repetition. Bring other employees in to be those natural supports. Teach your student how to ask for help from another employee instead of just sitting there not knowing what to do. And that's appropriate. That's what people who are just starting off jobs do anyways. They look for mentors within their own job. We already kind of talked about, preparing that student to put their best foot forward, teaching them communication skills, practicing the job skills in the classroom. If it's stocking shelves, teach them how to stock a shelf very explicitly. Teach them how to wipe a table very, very explicitly. I mean, hand over hand, you might have to teach that skill so that they can be successful. And then this is the way you make sure you are successful. You need to establish regular and ongoing communication and support to the student and the employer. So don't just like put a kid in and be like, good luck, bye. You need to be checking in on them constantly until you know that they're independent. Check in on the employer, be like, hey, was there anything that you need me to make sure that they know how to do? How did their first week go? Whatever you can do to show that you are going to be that extra support so they don't feel like they're taking on a huge responsibility by giving an opportunity. You make it easy for them so that they want to keep doing it. If you are not able, and I'm going to go really quick through this because I know we're right at the question Q&A time, but if you're not able to find established jobs because maybe there's just not job opportunities in your community, or maybe that student isn't quite ready for it, creating your own business is a great way to help students make money and create skills. Skills that your student and your family possess already might be a value of your community, and it might be a way to start a business. So think about, we kind of talked about assessing this. This is a way, assess what can your student do, what can maybe your family do that your student can assess or can assist you with, and you can make it into money making or into a job. So if you're going to create businesses, take a stock of your resources. What do you have? Large garden, large wash area, you're a good cook. See if there's a demand for it in your community. A school-based business, student-run business is a great way to build skills and also generate funds for your classroom. If you need supplies, start a business with your students. It can be part of your school day that they're working on it. If you have a garden, can you cut flowers? Can you pot plants? Can you do produce? That's a great way to start. You can think about other goods as well. And we'll give you some examples. So if you're going to create a business, there's two ways to do this. You can think about goods, things you can sell. So prepared food, produce, decorative plants, clothing, jewelry, housewares, anything that you can think of. Maybe you already know how to make something by hand. If you do, teach your students how to do it and sell it. Maybe it's a service. Is it laundry, doing laundry? We do that. We've done that a lot. That's a huge thing. We can teach our kids how to do laundry, and we can make it a service and get paid for it. Is it cooking? Is it cleaning? Babysitting? Here's that same student who loves kids, helping to take care of a baby. Animal care, gardening, manual labor, whatever it can be. Be creative. And how do you make that into money and into a job opportunity? So that's our last slide. I just want to say that, all of these things are really relating to what is the proper pathway. We talked about once you figure that out, then you might be able to use some of these skills. So I think, thank you for listening. And I think we're going to have a Q&A. I know we went really fast through that, but there's just so much to talk about.
Yeah, that could be like a 7-part series.
I know. Oh, Lisa, you're muted.
Yeah, you guys did great. So I have a couple questions here. Do you have any tips on how we can help an adult on the autism spectrum with limited verbal skills self-advocate? I know you hit on some of those, but it'd be great just to do another quick little, refresher on that, and any other tips that come to mind.
It's a really, really great question because it's not something that we maybe automatically think of. And I know Jenna and I both have experience with this, so we'll probably both have something to say about it. But, I think one of the things is being prepared. Make some materials ahead of time that student can use. I mean, it can be as simple as taking a piece of paper and writing down common phrases and teaching that student to hand that piece of paper, because all you need to do is teach that student to take a piece of paper and hand it. That could be what it is. If you have some more sophisticated materials, like a printer, a color printer, or even maybe like photos you can take, you can make photos so that the student maybe has more ability to like diversify of what they want to ask for and self-advocate. Is it even like if you're going to a restaurant and you know what the menu is, sometimes I would get a menu to bring home and then have that student think about it and be able to like circle and point. And when they get to the restaurant, they have those menus. If you have technology, I mean, this is a whole nother thing, but if you have a phone or if you have an iPad or anything else that a student can carry, there are apps, there's free apps that you can use that are voice output, that have pictures in them. And again, you could even write it down on the notes of a phone and have that student learn how to open the notes and show it to someone and say, like, there's multiple things that you set up. But I think it really is preparing, working on communication in general, and then just teaching those specific skills. Jenna, is there anything you want to add or specifics to that?
No, I mean, I think all of your examples were right on the money and things I would share. And I think the main thing I go back to is choice. To me, is the very beginning of self-advocacy, offering choices to our students, to our family members, instead of choosing for them, I think is the most basic level of advocacy. And so always having your student have the ability to choose, because that is then directing their day, that is directing their lives, and then communication in order to say what those choices are. But I think if you just think in your head, how can I offer this person as much control of their life as I can, from what they're going to wear in the day? You know, you want to wear this or this? Do you want to? And it can start with simple this or that. And this or that can be very powerful. So I just think starting with choice and then the specifics as we get more advanced are great.
Yeah. And I like, Jenna, just what you're saying with choice, like you can make it really concrete. I mean, you can literally two things like, did you want this or that? And have them in front, and even just letting them pick, if it's them pointing, if it's them using their eyes, whatever way you have figured out to communicate with them, starting with choice. And sometimes you have to start with hand over hand, like getting them to pick. Like it's a skill and it takes a long time, but the more opportunities you give, the more that they will be able to self-advocate and communicate for themselves.
And I think keeping in concert with what we've been talking about tonight, teaching others to always offer this person a choice, to speak to them, to give them a choice, to model that behavior of you letting them choose, even if this is a nonverbal student. You know, as Julia said, if you're at a restaurant and saying, you know, there's chicken and there's ribs, which do you want, chicken or ribs? And someone watching you ask that person lets them know that, again, just because they're nonverbal doesn't mean there's not a whole lot going on behind the scenes. So you are telling people this is a thinking person. This is a person who matters.
Here's another question. What if the child or teen becomes very resistant and aggressive upon breaking routines and transitioning into age-appropriate activities, which I know you guys hit a lot about that. And I think it kind of ties into another question that came about around behavior. So I'm going to read this one too, because you could probably combine them. But what if the student or patient does not engage with age-appropriate activities and still prefers activities in line of his or her development age, regardless of all the supports available? What do we do to tolerate this behavior, or how can we reinforce, what's socially acceptable? So I think they kind of in hand. So I thought I would share both of those with you.
Yeah. I would say, again, reminding us that it's the journey, not the destination, so again, being a good advocate and a good self-advocate is if a person's beginning to have behaviors that are pretty significant, that's their communication to you that things are moving a little too fast. And it's okay to slow down and back it up. I mean, if your intentions are good and you're moving in the right direction, you don't need to force too quickly. I think the other thing is using those then, as Julia said, it's okay to have some age inappropriate activities that you enjoy doing. Disney is huge for a lot of our students, and so keeping some of those things for when they're alone and as a reinforcer for expanding out beyond those is important. So you don't want to make the person think you're going to take away everything that they like to do. You're just going to teach them there's an appropriate time and place for them. So you may want to start by altering their schedule and building in those things that they like to do into their schedule, but into a time and place where it's socially acceptable and not going to change the way the people around them see them. And then they, again, have that sort of reinforcement that, oh, they're not taking it away. Here is when I can engage in that particular activity. And it's the reward for trying these other new activities. So that, I mean, that's one way of sort of looking at it. Julia.
The only thing I would say is if you really feel like you're ready to transition them into something that is not preferred and they're really resisting, I mean, using other best practices for students with disabilities, like preparing them. I mean, doing a social story about it, giving them choices. I think, as Jenna said, go slowly. Like, it doesn't have to be like, you can't have this anymore. How do you make it a really positive thing? Give them so much praise when they do something. Get them in a place where, honestly, that social reinforcement, even for our students with autism who maybe we don't always recognize their interest in social activities, it is powerful. It is so powerful. So if you can get them in a place that they are with other people their age and they get some natural reinforcement for doing things that are age appropriate, that might be a great way. I'm sure, Lisa, I'm sure there's a lot of other information on your Facebook and your website about some of these specific techniques.
Yes.
And I think applying those in the same situation is what you're going to need to do. It's the same thing as any type of change or any type of new activity or reinforcer. Yeah.
And always keeping in mind, looking at what is it about that particular thing that makes it reinforcing, and seeing if there's close approximations that are a little more age appropriate. If it's singing Disney songs at the top of their lungs, it's finding out what about that is it that's reinforcing, and finding an approximation that's a little more socially acceptable and gradually shaping that behavior.
Yeah. I totally agree with all of those things. And there's two things that I want to cover off on. One is that we will do a workshop, here in a few months on just like reinforcement and just again on behavior management, because we realize that we've done, quite a few different webinars, but it's another area that I think that these type of questions continue to come up. And so we're going to hone in a little bit more on that. And then the second one here is we have a question that I'd like to close on. And it's a question that I think I'm going to take, and I'll let you guys actually tack onto this, but what if some countries such as the Philippines are not welcoming to people with disabilities to work in their businesses, despite the fact that there is a law in place to do so? So I have been doing quite a bit of work, in the Philippines with, various different organizations. And I would just say that if you are running into that, I highly, highly recommend that work with the Autism Society in the Philippines, because they're doing a lot of advocacy right now to try to really, really push for this. And I think they're making headways. But what I would say is that if there are businesses that are just not willing to do this, just walk away. Like, really partner with people who want to do this. You don't want to be working with somebody that is just not engaged or doesn't want to. And I think that we are slowly finding more and more businesses that do want to engage. And so I think we start that grassroots that way. And, again, partner with the mom and pops who really do, want to, I think that's where we start. Again, if you really are seeing somebody that is not, being respectful or, is literally turning their back on a law that they shouldn't, again, I would work with the Autism Society in the Philippines, because, they, have inroads into, people who can help, when somebody isn't doing right by what they should be doing. But I think, again, if there's a business that doesn't want to, don't waste your time, because we will find those businesses, and it's slowly happening. So it is, I mean, we run into the same issue here in the United States, right? It's everywhere, even though there's laws. So,
and I think I would add, just lead with your rock stars too. I think that when you're making new headway and creating new partnerships, to start with the students that you think that have the most skill sets, so that people become comfortable with working alongside someone with a disability. And then over time, you begin to expand their knowledge of the full spectrum of what people with disabilities is. And I think Julia would agree. I mean, and whenever we're developing a brand new job, we're always trying to send our rock stars there to start it and get our foot in the door and have a positive first impression. And I'm not saying that the other students are not going to have a first impression, but I'm saying that it's a learning curve for the general public to get used to working with students with disabilities. This is our lives. It's not theirs. And there's a lot of fear and misunderstanding. So starting with your rock star students and then gradually increasing the knowledge with the employers is also helpful.
Absolutely.
I just saw somebody make a note that said that they're trying to make this as a study and their advisor turned it down. I would say, go do that study and try to go get to the right hands. And once you do that study, feel free to reach back out to me, because I will also try to help you get that into the right hands, because I think that study would be really, really, it could, make the steps forward that is required. And I know that, in Davao, they are making quite a bit of headway around this. In the SM malls, you will see people working with disabilities. Even the taxi cab companies are hiring people, at the doors to help. There's a couple of kids with Down syndrome, or adults with Down syndrome, who are actually, calling for the cabs. I mean, it's, helping people put their groceries in their cars. I mean, it's really impressive. There's hotels that are hiring them to be doormen. Pearl Farm is hiring people with Down syndrome, and Flacor. So, I mean, there's definitely organizations I know that are starting, and the more we can start to show that progress is great. So, yeah, super, super thank you, Julia and Jenna. We look forward to having you guys back, because like we said, there are topics that we just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
And I know that people are, commenting, how inspiring, and that, they want to learn more. So we will definitely have you guys back. And thanks again. And everybody have a good day, good night, good afternoon.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.